People will come up to me and say, your father changed my life. He called me, or he helped me in this situation. Or I get, even nowadays, they were at school, and they were a troubled teen, and my dad took them into the principal's office, and they were expecting to be, the principal going to come down hard. Instead, he just had a conversation with them. He cried with them. He helped them. He loved them. And that's been I'm getting emotional. My mantra for wanting to pastor and lead people is less about kind of this grandiose vision of a certain person on the stage, but someone who, like my father, was real with people. He cared about people. He knew their name, and he was more about those relationships than he was about this kind of organizational leadership kind of stuff.
Hey there, welcome back to the Value Added Podcast. My name is Jared, and I'm here with our very own celebrity pastor.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think of myself as. Yes, 100%.
This is Jordan Moody, a great friend of mine, another local pastor here in the frozen area of New England. We're trying to make it through the month of March right now as we're recording this. It's mud season.
Most beautiful time in New England is March.
It's
mud season.
So gorgeous. So Jordan, do tell us a little bit about yourself. We're going to be talking about life, primarily his, hopefully our Lord and Savior's, a little bit of mine as well in there. Life lessons in leadership. Jordan has graced us with his presence. So Jordan, just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you've come from, a little bit of your journey, and why you're sitting on the very famous Value Added Podcast today.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. This is great. Celebrity is not a term that I think of in any way. But we are, it's really cool to do this and be able to have a conversation. I don't get the chance to really kind of go deep on some of these kinds of things that you guys will be able to talk about today. But
for sure.
I pastor Hope Fellowship Church in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Yep. Took me 4 minutes to get here today, so the traffic was rough.
And we're sitting in the church that Bill and I serve in right now.
Yes, so it was nice. We're kind of local town churches here, right down the road, trying to support and help each other out.
Yeah,
we're on
get a
the
chance
same
to partner,
mission at that, partner together on a lot of things, and so that's what I love about what you guys do here at Jaffrey Bible. And in New Hampshire, in this region of Monadnock, is really awesome.
God's moving, man.
Yeah. So I pastor Hope Fellowship Church. I'm the teaching pastor, lead pastor, but we're an elder-run church, so I'm also just an elder. And at the same time, wear a lot of different hats. But
for sure.
I've been pastoring there now. This June will be starting my 10th year there. So I started pastoring 26. Wow. I was very mature and knew so many things. And now I'm 36. So it's time has flown. God's been really good, and I just look back on that time and is just so thankful for all that He's brought me through the ups and downs of a lot of different things. But it's unique in some sense. My story is because I'm living in the same town right now that I grew up in, and I spent my whole life in Dublin, New Hampshire, and I find it, unique that now I also just built a house there in Dublin. I grew up at Dublin Christian Academy, which is a local Christian private boarding school. I grew up there K through 12, and now my own children are going to that same exact school and kind of reliving my own life. Which is also funny because I'm kind of reliving my father's life. So it's a unique story in the sense, like, I grew up in Dublin, like I said, at Dublin Christian Academy, but my grandfather founded that school in the 60s. The school just hit its 60th anniversary, I believe it is. Wow. So Melvin Moody was the founder of Dublin Christian Academy at that time, and then my uncle took over after he passed away of the school, head of school, and Leon Moody. And then my father, Kevin Moody, took over as head of school after he retired. And then my father just passed away a few years ago, and my cousin now, Eric Moody, is the head of school. So it hasn't always been designed that way to happen in that original, but that's just kind of how God has gifted the faithfulness and the heritage of my family to steward that place. And it's a place I can look back to and find that was just extraordinarily formative for my growing up years, being taught the word and the gospel and Christian education from a young age. I'm so thankful for that. And so I really look up to that and look back and think about, I didn't always value it,
Yeah.
the value added podcast. But I certainly
Sure.
didn't value what I was given and how this amazing leadership and education and all the different role models in my life that I had growing up. I didn't value it and think it was really anything special until now. I look back and I think of all that God taught me in that. So.
And your kids are benefiting from it.
And my
right?
kids now are benefiting it. And it's just one of those things. And when in high school, my friends used to joke because I was the principal's kid, right? And they'd be like, dude, you're just going to come back here. You're going to run the school yourself, because your dad and your grandfather.
You can get us out of trouble.
Dude, I said, absolutely not. I said, I will never come back here.
Oh,
and
geez.
right? And as soon as you tell God no and never, you can almost guarantee that's going to happen. And so that's kind of what it was like for me. I was very much like, I'm not coming back to this small town in New Hampshire. I'm going to get out of here. I'm not coming back to this school. I'm bigger and better and all this. And here I am. Yeah. I live in the same town. Send my kids to the same school. And, find it. So, yeah.
And God's smiling at you. Yeah.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about your faith journey. Like, obviously, not wanting to come back and all that is one thing. But when did, your faith become your own in that sense of the word?
Yeah, when I think about it, because in 2 Timothy 1, right, Paul's speaking to Timothy and he says, Timothy, don't forget your, your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice and what they have entrusted to you, right? And take this good deposit that's been given to you and guard it. You've been entrusted with something, fan into flame the work of God that's been given to you. Absolutely. And I can look back on my life in a similar way as Timothy, that I was entrusted this heritage, this godly heritage at a young age. And yet, as I said, I didn't always value that. But it was something when I was around 13 in particular, I can remember reading 1 John chapter 5. I don't remember if it was a sermon. I feel like it was, but I look back, I'm like, I don't know exactly the catalyst of that chapter, but my whole life since then has been, that is a formative chapter for me. It says multiple times in that chapter that you can know, K-N-O-W, that you can know that you are saved and you can know that God loves you. And there was something about my growing up in an environment or a Christian fishbowl or an expectation as the principal's kid. My dad was an elder and a wonderful leader. And I had this godly heritage and this expectation put on me. Sure. Though my parents never put on me, it was also just a culture of expectation. Yeah. That I knew internally I did not meet that. Okay. That I knew my heart wasn't matching what other people expected of me on the outside, right? So there was a difference between internally knowing what I really felt and the sin that lived within me and the external kind of expectation that I was putting out for people. I knew that those things didn't match up.
You're talking about 13, 14 years old?
Yeah, 13 years old.
Wow.
And so 1 John 5, like I said, I maybe it was a sermon, maybe it was, or I was reading it on my own. My parents modeled for me, reading the word, studying, doing your devotions. And so I'm wondering if that's what it was. But I look back and I think that was a passage that helped guide me to know that it wasn't just what I did. It wasn't if I was meeting certain standards. It wasn't if I was matching up. It was the fact that I could just run to Jesus and that I could know I have a relationship with him. And that's what really matters. And from that point on, I didn't struggle with my salvation or struggle with my identity and struggle with if I mattered or if I was worthwhile, because those were things I was having trouble with. And from that, really kind of set a foundation to where I grew up in a Christian environment, went away to Bible school. I met my wife in high school. We were high school sweethearts. We dated all through Bible school, college, and
is she from the area?
She's from the area.
Yeah,
she was a dorm student at Dublin Christian Academy.
Oh, okay.
It's
forgot
both
about that. Yeah.
local and dorm students. So, like growing up in high school, I had international students in my class. In my high school, I had this tiny little school, but I had students from United Arab Emirates, from Ethiopia, from China, from South Korea, from U.S., around New England, all in this little, tiny school. And so it was neat. I was surrounded by a whole bunch of different backgrounds and understanding, yet people coming there to be trained as Christian leaders for the next generation. So I met Jamie, my wife. She was a boarding school. She was at the boarding school living there in the dorms, and so we met there. And after she finally broke up with one of my friends, I had the ability to move in and ask her out on a date, and it went well. She
didn't know
told
that.
one of my friends, she had told some of the other friends, some of her own girlfriends, that she would never date me, is what she said.
Okay.
And so again, another situation that if you say you'll never do something,
That's right.
be careful. God might move in there. So eventually I was able to ask her on a date, and the rest is history.
I didn't know you
We
could
dated.
date going to DCA. Right?
Yeah, you can. In Christian schools, you can, as long as you just don't tell anyone. No, it was totally kosher, and it was great, and it was
that's
an
wonderful.
awesome thing. And so we now went through Bible school and all that, and I was constantly thrust into positions of leadership that I just felt like I wasn't maybe ready for, but I feel like that's a little bit of like, I felt like I was young, or I felt like I was inexperienced, and I was just constantly thrust into positions of in college, or speaking to my fraternity, or a chaplain, or I was a president of, so like these kinds of things that I didn't really necessarily go looking for, but God was just kind of constantly pushing me into positions where I had to really start, leading in ways. And then worked in Christian camps for a little bit during college, and then graduated, got married, and moved back into the area. My dad was having some health challenges, dealing with kidney failure, multiple myeloma, and then eventually passed away in 2020 of leukemia. And so it was like a 10-year stretch of me trying to deal with my dad's health and help my mom out. And so I was just staying locally in the area to help my dad out with all the different doctor's appointments and so I was teaching at Dublin Christian Academy after I graduated university, and I was coaching soccer and girls basketball, and I was a dorm supervisor teaching Bible and geography and history and doing a variety of things. And then I was also in seminary at Liberty University studying to go into ministry, not sure if I was going to be a pastor, not really sure what God wanted me to do. I was interested in missions. I was doing mission trips with an organization to Micronesia and Honduras and Mexico and a variety of places, thinking that that's what I was going to be doing. And then God really convicted me, or directed me, that local church ministry was where my heart was at, and I had a desire to preach and teach. And so I was doing that at the school and all of that. And I just think back and really thankful for God kind of leading those things in my life, leading me into positions of leadership where I had to really step up and take ownership of my faith and start to really gather if this is something I believed, or is this just something passed down to me?
Yeah, for sure. So how did you end up at Hope Fellowship then?
So Hope was unique because of that. And I think when I look back on my dad's sickness and diagnosis, I would never desire that for anyone. I think God used my dad's health situation to really guide me and teach me a lot of things, because it kept me in the area. I wasn't intending to stay with my wife in this area, but I was around home helping out. And so Hope Fellowship Church had an opening at their church. At that time, we were meeting in a basement in New Ipswich, and they had an opening, and I just started filling the pulpit for them because I knew a few of the people there. They needed help. They were looking for a pastor, and I'm like, hey, I'm in seminary. I'd love to preach and teach and help you guys out, not intending anything that they would ever call me to be the pastor. I was 25, 26 at the time. I hadn't finished seminary and didn't have any kids. We just recently married. I just wasn't expecting that. I was just wanting to help out. I was somewhat local. I could drive over there and preach and teach and help them. Eventually, long story short, they asked me to submit my resume along with the other group. There was 20 other people on the list or whatever, and I'm not expecting much. It's like, oh, that's great. That's a nice gesture, but I just don't feel as if, I'm ready for that, right? I didn't feel like I was ready to do that. And yet, as time went by, eventually I got down, and they couldn't come up with enough reasons to get rid of me. So eventually they're like, why don't we just hire the guy? And so they called me to be their pastor, and that was 10 years ago. So I've been there ever since, and we've moved from New Ipswich. Now we built a facility in Jaffrey right down the road from you guys, and we've been there, and God's continuing to move and work in those ways. So it's been a joy. It's been not easy every step of the way, but I look back and I'm really just thankful for the faithfulness of God and all those things.
So in this journey of yours up until this point we just paused at, who's been one or two leaders in your own life that you just, without these people, you might not be where you are? I always like to ask this question because when we look back on our journeys, I could think of people like my dad, And people like, Bill, who's co-hosts this podcast with me, people like my friend Bill, the late Bill Hackle up at camp, John Terrio up at camp. I mean, just there's men in my life and women who are responsible for me being the person I am today, kind of mentors and people we really lean on. Who is that for you?
Yeah, there's so many. I think I look back on so many of the teachers and the different people that influenced me, coaches in my life, and sports. Sports was a big part of my life, and like I think back, one moment was one of my teachers, Ellen Kaka. Was one of my best friend's parents, but I think I was in 9th grade maybe, and I was just dinking around and being just not interested in leading or doing anything serious, being a nice, middle school, high schooler, And I can remember one time she pulled me aside after lunch, and I had just been mouthing off and just, thinking you're better than everyone else and not being serious about anything. And she was wanting me to step up and lead, like, hey, you should be doing more, right? And I can still remember, I don't remember all the words she said, but I can picture the corner of the dining room we were standing in. She pulled me aside as all my friends were leaving. And she just kind of said essentially, like, when are you going to step up? Like, when are you going to stop dinking around in life? And when are you going to start doing something with your life? You have been given so much potential and you're just wasting it. And she was known for often speaking direct like that. And I can think back that one little moment, she probably doesn't even remember that. You know what I mean? But for me, for some reason, that little conversation just stuck a little thing in my heart and in my head, just saying, you know what? Yeah, when am I going to start doing that?
Yeah.
And so that was a little moment. I can see little key moments along the way where God used different teachers to speak into my life. But the most formative figure in my life has been my father. And maybe that's cliche for some people to say, but I've also recognized that as I've learned and grown up and counseled people, not everybody grew up in a household with a father who was an extraordinary leader and a person who loved Jesus and just like that. I just thought everybody had that, And like you can think, you've talked much about your father, Peter, and just his example. And then I've preached on the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And many people who pray that, our Father, that's a stumbling block for them.
It's a wound.
It's a difficult thing to say, oh wait, God can be a good father? Like, I don't know what that looks like. My entire life, I've seen nothing but a good father, an example figure in my life. And he has been someone that even to this day, even this last week, I had somebody come up to me and say, you remind me so much of your dad. I knew your father and he was this and this and this. And like, I get that every month, either about my grandfather or my father, different people coming in to me when I speak at camps or I go to this church and speak at people will come up to me and say, your father changed my life. He called me or he helped me in this situation. Or I get, even nowadays, they were at school and they were a troubled teen and my dad took them into the principal's office and they were expecting to be, the principal going to come down hard. And instead, he just had a conversation with them. He cried with them. He helped them. He loved them. And that's been I'm getting emotional. My mantra for wanting to pastor and lead people is less about kind of this grandiose vision of a certain person on the stage, but someone who, like my father, was real with people. He cared about people. He knew their name, and he was more about those relationships than he was about this kind of organizational leadership kind of style. He was very personable and loving and funny and didn't take himself too seriously, and yet also was a strong leader and stood for his convictions and values. And so that's, for me, I watched him my entire life live and serve. For me, leadership and people who have influenced my style is people like my dad. And he was an example of that. Many times, I found out later on after life that there were many times when the school was close to closing, money was tight. My father wouldn't take a paycheck to make sure the teachers and the staff and faculty had paychecks, and he would say, I'm not going to take a pay. He wouldn't tell anybody that, but we found that out later on. My mom knew the whole time, but she didn't tell us as kids. But when times were tough, he was the first to sacrifice, give himself. He saw of himself as, yes, a principal, a head of school, a Christian educator, valuing high level of education, but a minister, someone who cared and served
You're a
others.
servant. Yeah.
We stayed late after every service, cleaning up, setting up chairs. On Saturdays, we cleaned the bathrooms of the church. Like, I don't know, this was normal to me. But again, I saw that in my life, just constant life example. And so that was
like
formative for me.
you feel like you're carrying on that legacy now?
As best I can, although there are times, right, where you look back and you're like, how did he do all this,
Yeah.
you know? And how can I keep in this manner? And I'm sure that he had those same kinds of moments, you know?
Yeah. No, that's just, it's wonderful. It absolutely is wonderful. And it kind of leads me to my next question. I know you and I talked briefly about this before in the past, but I heard on a podcast somewhat recently that, you know, the church has, in some ways, and I mean the church as in the entire body, has traded, you know, faithfulness for success in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on that as you're pastoring a church and as you're a husband and a father, and you know, you just sharing your dad's legacy.
Yeah.
You know, what does faithfulness look like to you?
Yeah, faithfulness. Oh, that's really interesting. I think of a quote that I've kind of lived by. I went to the other day, I don't know if I used it in a sermon, but I went to find the source of the quote. I read it in a book, and I was looking through my bookshelf, and I was like, where is that quote? And I was trying to I couldn't find it, but I've memorized it. And so then I'm like, I thought it was attributed to Spurgeon. The point is, I read it someplace, and I'm sure it's true. So that's good, right? You know, right? Abraham Lincoln said
Someone
that or
said it
something.
somewhere.
I don't know. But no, it's a quote. Essentially, it's, you know, whether I am successful or not is not one half so much my business as whether I'm faithful and true. And for some reason that stuck with me. I don't know, again, where I read it. I thought it was attributed to Spurgeon. I went to try to find it the other day. But whether I'm successful or not, like I want to be successful. I think as men, we want to be successful in our industries. If you're a business leader, if you work in the trades, whatever you're doing, if you're you want a successful family, but what is that success? I mean, that's a big term in how you define that, and especially in church culture in our world is in pastoring and leading people. What's the success of a church? I can't really control that at the end of the day, whether that term is successful, but that's maybe not one half so much my business as whether I am faithful and true. And so so from day one, early on pastoring, just feeling over my head and overwhelmed, and I don't know how to do what God's calling me to do. I can, however, be faithful to him and true of heart to what God wants me to do and have that relationship with him at a deeper level. God can take the rest, and he can grow our church in size and width and depth as well, right? He's going to do that if I am a leader being faithful to his calling on my life personally and my primary calling of my family and my wife. And then if I'm being true to his word and not living a hypocritical, double-minded way, and who's a man unstable in all his ways. If I'm being faithful and true to his calling and his word, and to be faithful in that, then he's going to take care of the rest. And that lets me take a lot of the burden off, right? Yeah. And I think that's been something to me that characterizes what success looks like.
Yeah, no, it's such a good answer. I think a lot of not only, you know, pastors, but, you know, men and women of God need to hear that message. Yeah. You know, we get so confused, you know, our whether it's our career, whether it's parenting or whatever it is, you know, we're looking for these milestone successful moments. Yeah. Kind of forgetting that kind of flows out of just faithfulness to God. Yeah. Your dad's case in point, my dad's case in point. I mean, it's wonderful. But so in sharing that, you know, that whole faithfulness, you know, and staying true to the Lord, how do you then balance life, ministry, parenting, marriage with the demands of the church?
You don't.
You were solo over there for a while until
myself and a part-time secretary.
Yeah, until the bearded wonder of Josh came.
Yeah, Josh now. I've a couple staff members now to support the ministry, which has been absolutely amazing.
Godsend, I can
Godsend,
imagine.
And just so grateful for the staff and particularly the elder team and the deacons at our church that have supported me, and I would say been patient with me in my learning.
A wonderful group
ups
of people.
And downs.
So how do you manage
the balance? Is been something, that I think as we are young and aspiring leaders and young in our professions, you're trying to grow with the speed of life and trying to balance that thing. Trying to provide. I know you guys have talked about margin in your life. Where is that margin coming from? I would say I'm really good at it at some times and really bad at it other times. And then I've learned from my mistakes. Now recently, trying to continue not repeat those same mistakes. But there is a balance of those kinds of things. I think, again, having a support around you, but really knowing that my wife and my family is my first ministry. I can't be an elder. It's a challenging position to be an elder or a pastor. For in the Bible, it gives you your character quality. Your job description is in the Bible right there. And so one of those is to, if you know, how can you take care of the household of God if you can't take care of your own house, right? I mean, and so wanting to make sure that I'm loving my wife first above all other things and putting her priorities and needs above the church and not be having the mistress of the church run my life, right? And as I've been young, it's unique because my church has been patient with me, and that's what I was going to say, because I came to Hope just newly married, and then for 10 years there, I've had 3 children. My first house we built, and then my father passed away. I went through a time of grief, they have been with me through thick and thin. First child, second child, third child. So for me, I've been growing up in my own life with the church, and they've been patient and maturing with me. I pray into that as well. So it has been something where I'm trying to learn to balance that. There had been times, I would say, when I did face a period of burnout in 2020, in 2021. There was a variety of factors where I look back and I'm like, maybe if I had done this or done that, I'm not sure. But sometimes it takes, challenging things in life to truly learn what you're supposed to learn. Like I would say, well, if I had done this, I should have just known or whatever. But I would say that I took a sabbatical in 2021, I believe it is, or the elders let me take some time off where I had felt like the ministry, my own personal grief over losing my father, some other spiritual attacks I feel like I was under at that time. I was just not in a good place personally, as a leader, as a husband. And my wife and I, we needed some time and some space to breathe again and to see things clearly, to see that maybe the sun does come out, maybe there is good in the world, because everything I'm seeing and sensing and feeling right now just doesn't feel that good. God doesn't seem all that good. And I'm not sure if I really love these people anymore. You get to a point where those things aren't true, but that's what you feel. And I'm needing space to be able to get back to what is true and knowing that I can truly taste and see that the Lord is good. Like, I know I read that in the Bible, but I'm not living that as a leader or a pastor right now. I need some time to take. So for me, I guess I've had those moments where I feel like I'm living that out, but I've had moments when I'm also needing a break and a sabbatical and a time to rest and recharge. And then I came back from that recommitted to the ministry and more aligned to God's goodness than ever before. So I'm thankful for that. I also think about just in my life, like my family, like they're doing ministry with me. Like it is also really unique that in church ministry, my kids are part of it. My wife's involved in it. We're committed to that same mission. We're not like trying to separate those things. It's like life, man. We're just doing it together. And then I also have to remember, pastoring is a hard job, but at the same time, it's not the hardest job. There are other guys working way more hours than I am. They're getting up at 5 a.m., getting late out, working concrete all day long, and I get to sit in a cushy office. So, not always viewing this like difficulty of the pastoring and ministry. There are men and women working their tails off and just putting it into perspective that, being faithful with the burdens God's called on me to bear, but also recognizing there's a lot of people in my church working and serving in a variety of other capacities that I'm grateful for.
It's funny because a lot of people think balance is like when we talk about life and ministry and all that, they think of the word balance, they think of like a balancing beam where there's like no grace at all. And that's just not true. It's more like a cart path, where you can come over here for a sabbatical and you can walk over to this side for a season of, lots of busyness going on. And there's movement in there, wiggle room, I guess. Grace would be the
Even
church
in
word.
the sabbatical concept, I
Even
talked to
in.
a few pastors, and I was like, well, how have you done sabbatical? What would you recommend? And they're like, well, when I took a sabbatical, I went to Europe and I had 3 months and we just did this and that. And I took it. I'm like, I got 3 kids under the age of 7. Like, how am I going to do that? Like, they're like, oh, good point. I was in my late 50s when I did that. And I was like, it's a different pace of life, right? The speed of life, depending on where you are at. If you're a young mom or you're a young dad with multiple children at home, right, it's going to be busier than when you are on other times. So you're right. It's not always just balancing on this beam, but rather, finding out that season of life that you're in and pursuing that same mission and goal and being on task with that, but also recognizing not everything needs to be done today.
Well, that's
and you have a
priority
lifetime
management.
Priority, yeah.
As opposed to everybody's, time. Well, no, it's more priorities than it is time. Everybody's got 24 hours in a day.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
That's
good.
super good though. So personal story, and for you, that's kind of shaped your leadership journey. What's been kind of the moment where you coming out of this? I don't think was the same, or some things were solidified. Was there like a moment in your journey? I know you talked about your dad passing. You talked about this season of doubt and going into a sabbatical. Or is it one of those? It's something else, but
the hardest things in life often stick out to us the most, right?
They certainly do.
So the things you face, and everybody goes through them, and everyone's going to face some sort of challenge and difficulty. Everybody's going to walk through that valley of the shadow of death. You're going to go through that period at some point in your life. And, the pastoring now for 10 years and looking back in the honeymoon stage and the times of when it's been really good, and even the stage I'm in right now, which seems to be I just wake up and just so grateful for the church and the people I've been given to minister to, and it's just a joy each and every day. Yet it isn't always like that. And in particular, 2020 was everyone's favorite year, if I recall, right? I do think everyone looks back on, what is it, like BC, AD, like now it's like before COVID, BC, and it's like after COVID. We just loved pastoring during that year, did we not?
A joy.
Loved
It was
those
a joy.
emails. So it was a challenge just on that level of trying to pastor and make leadership decisions during a volatile time, both in the unknowns about COVID, whatever you think about it. We didn't know everything we know now.
Right.
And yet those who were right are saying, see, I told you so. Those who weren't right are saying, well, I didn't know, And then those of us who are trying to do the best we can to lead a group of people and a church in a very unique period of time, we didn't know what we were doing half the time, and we're trying to do what's best. So we're doing that. That was a challenge. I also fret over those things because I'm very perfectionist in a lot of things. I'm wanting to make right decisions, think things through before I make decisions. I'm not very spontaneous in that. And so that was just a struggle with my own personality, that things were always shifting and changing. I'm not good in those environments. And then, let alone with that, we had just built our first house. God blessed us. A lot of people in our church helped us do this. And we had just come off this glorious time. We moved into our house in June. My father came in and had a meal in our house. And then 2 weeks later, he passed away from leukemia, this battle that I knew was coming. We'd prayed for healing for years, and yet God finally gave him his healing in completion when he meets Jesus face to face. And that was just this moment that I knew was coming, yet was still a challenge to face. And then seeking to try to pastor a church while I was personally grieving. And then I think Satan knows that. He knows when you're weak, and he knows when your heart is a little tender and perhaps doubting, and he pounces on that.
Yeah, sure does.
And I faced, and I won't get into details on this, but I faced some spiritual attack on a variety of other levels. And so you couple that. Oh, and then, hey, there was a political season, I think, going on.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Always is political now.
There's always, pretty much every year is a political thing now. But in some ways, it was volatile in that. So couple all those things together. My wife and I also, and I don't tell this too often, but we also, when my father passed away, we had just found out we were pregnant. And then a month or so later, we eventually had a memorial service. And then we had just found out the day of my dad's memorial service that as I was going to speak at his funeral and everything, that we had just miscarried.
Oh.
And so that, and then my father was the biggest leadership influence in my life. He taught Sunday school at our church, and people knew him, and he'd been sick for a long time. So all of those things, I guess I didn't know what grief was like until I experienced it. I had done funerals before and talked with people about grief. I hadn't really experienced it for myself. And so God had to take me through that valley of the shadow of death and to be with me in it, to emerge out the other side, almost reborn in some ways, like rekindling my faith on the other side of a sabbatical. But in between that, and again, I don't share this flippantly. I don't like to just, say things like this, but I did consider quitting the ministry. I talked with my wife about, I'm really not sure I'm cut out for this. And like I said earlier, I told her in one conversation, I can still distinctly remember where I was internally hurting and grieving and feeling really offended by some things that I was being attacked with and that I didn't feel were right or just. And I remember just saying, I don't think I love these people anymore. And my wife said, well, I still do, And she was like committed to it. And she was the rock. My wife was the one who kept me here. And I was like, I don't really know if I want to stay here. I'm out. I can come up with all these kinds of reasons. And she's like, well, I can't come up with those reasons. And I think God's called us to be here. And so she helped me walk through that time. And I'm so thankful for her, as she's been my supporter and my rock ever since. And so that moment was super formative for me. I had to make some decisions as a leader that were hard. And I feel like were the right thing to do. And yet at the same time, in that leadership lesson was also some of the loudest voices in your life might not always be the true and right voices. The squeaky wheel kind of, they're maybe they're not all right, even though that's what I hear the most. And yet at the same time, they might have also been kind of right in some things too, that I was not doing right myself. So I think I had to be honest with some things that were going on of like, okay, that's not true, but hey, that's also kind of true. There's some things there that I need to look at in my own heart that I'm not doing and that I'm really not even realizing I'm going through. So I don't know if that all makes sense in some ways as I was rambling, but
it does.
That's a bit of that moment that has shaped and formed kind of before that COVID and after COVID and what that did for me as a leader as I almost got to the point of just quitting. And yet I'm really grateful God has used different people and friends. I have two close friends at the church that one took me out to lunch and the other, I could still remember it when he's like, I'm for you, I'm here, not everyone's left you, David's kind of in the cave or whatever in Psalms, always like, God, why is everyone else succeeding and I'm the only one? Or Elijah, right? He's like, nobody loves, even just the prophets of Baal and all that, hidden fire raining down from heaven, and yet Jezebel wants to kill him and he's done with life, And he's like sending ravens to feed him and he's still like, I can't do this, no, everyone's left me. He's like, no, not everyone's left you. There's still a lot of people around. So there's just realities that we think we're living in that just aren't true. And so speaking truth into the false reality that we're living in, and that's a lot of what I went through. So.
Man, I think it's really important for folks to hear, this kind of raw testimony, because I think, we don't open up. And
I certainly don't probably.
Enough. Well, not just pastors, but people in general. You don't know how powerful their journey can speak into someone else's life. But so what are you doing with all this? And I'm hinting at something because I know you've been working on a project that I think is coming out of a lot of your journey. Is that correct? You're writing something?
So that was also a unique thing. A friend of mine, Michaela Van Dyke, who you've had on this podcast, kept encouraging me. She's like, you should write. And I said, Michaela, I do it all the time. I preach a sermon every week. I write a sermon. She's like, yeah. And what you're doing, you should be writing that down and putting it into a book and some of these things. Anyways, long story short, I was able to get in contact with a small Christian publisher called Hosanna Revival. They're fantastic. Our values align what they do. They want to get beautifully crafted, handcrafted resources into the church and get those resources into people's hands to interact and go deeper in their study of the Word of God. And so I signed a book contract with them to write a book about a little bit of my journey with grief, but in particular on the concept of heaven. So I preached a series on heaven at my church after my dad passed away because I was really grappling with it myself. I believed in heaven. I believe in God. I'm a pastor, dadgummit, right? But at the same time, wow, where is my dad right now? And is it just like floating in the clouds like forever? Like that doesn't really sound like, if you just look up a lot of books on heaven, it's like blue sky and like clouds and like light and angel wings. And you're like, is this biblical or is this just like the culture around the concept of the afterlife?
Sure.
And so I know a lot, if my theology around heaven and eternity in particular is so vapid and empty in some ways, or just non-filled out. It didn't seem very deep. It was just like, man, I'm glad they're in a better place. Well, what is that? And do I have to look forward to forever? Like, are we going to be in a church service forever? I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Sunday mornings. I look forward to Sunday. I preach every Sunday and I love it. But am I going to be doing that forever? Like my girls, when we do the Lord's Prayer together at night sometimes, the very end, and the power and the glory forever and ever. And they always like to go forever and ever and ever and ever. And they keep making the joke. And I'm like, all right, girls, stop. But what are we doing forever? And so I'm writing a book on that. It's called Heaven and Earth, Awakening Hope for Eternity with God. And it's less on, so many books have been written on the end times, right? Gazillions of them.
Yes,
And some of them are just lousy.
And no two
I
are
would
the
not
same.
recommend. But the idea of when does the Lord returning? When the pre-trib, post-trib, post-millennial, amillennial, all these things.
Yeah.
It's less on that and trying to interpret the minutia of Revelation,
Right.
and more on the grander concept of the fact that the Lord is going to return one day. I don't know when that is.
Right.
But when he returns at some point in time, he will bring with him a new heaven and a new earth. It's not heaven or earth, okay? It's heaven and earth. And I think that's an interesting thing that I felt like for me was missing, that earth was a concept kind of left aside. It's about heaven. Well, yes, heaven is the domain of God, the place of being with God. But he is going to have us live on a new earth one day forever, where much of the enjoyment of what we have in life, sports, food, relationships, we will enjoy those on a new, redeemed, renewed earth forever and get to explore that in depths we've never had the ability to do before.
It's mind-blowing.
Right? So, I got to get my bucket list in before I die. Well, why? Like, you're going to have eternity on a new earth to be able to explore those bucket list items you didn't get to do. And so we just forget about that aspect of God's given us good gifts here now to enjoy, and we will richly enjoy those same good gifts in a greater capacity one day when he returns. And so I think if we miss that as the church, which I'm not saying the church and everyone else missed this, I missed that. I didn't understand that. And it's not until I really grappled with loss of someone I deeply loved. And then that same year, which I also didn't mention, after my father passed away, I think I did 10 funerals in like a year's time.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, you told me that. Yeah.
And it wasn't just like, and I'm not using this flippantly either, but it wasn't just doing a funeral for someone that I kind of didn't really know. It was, because I've done those before, and those are sad and difficult too. But it was also doing funerals for like key members of our church. I did a funeral for a deep, good friend of mine who was also an elder at our church. I did funerals for many people who were kind of legacy people in this community, friends, family, some hard ones too, challenging. So those periods where I'm just like, what is death? What is this all about? I mean, this isn't as easy to just say, hey, you're grieving over your husband's loss. Well, he's in a better place, Like I've said that, or I've kind of given people's hugs, but or I'm sitting at the deathbed in a hospital with someone who's breathing their last breath, and I'm reading a psalm with the family. I'm like, what do I believe about this stuff, right? So that to me was where the book came from. It's not going to be a long book, but it's going to be something you can use as a small group material in a church. There's questions. There's a leader guide at the end. The book comes out at the end of this year, more likely the beginning of next year. It's kind of aligning with like Lent and Easter. There's a lot of theme about resurrection. Okay?
Oh, that's wonderful.
Of coming into death, but Jesus, through his resurrected body, gives us a real sense about what our bodies will be like in the new heaven and the new earth. We learn a lot from Jesus' resurrection as we align ourselves with that. And so, and the resurrected earth and what he intends to do with the kingdom of God. So the themes are less about maybe Christmassy kind of at the end of the year. There may be some pre-orders around that time, but really about the themes where I think it would be an ideal book to kind of go through as a church, kind of Lent time leading up to Easter. It probably could be done really well in like an 8-week study as a small group, or even just personally interacting with it. But anyways, I'm excited about that. I'm kind of in the beta readers have it right now.
Sure.
And so I have to get the final comments from beta readers in a few weeks. And then this summer it goes to publishing and all of that. But anyways, so yeah.
No,
exciting.
it kind of your story and part in the maybe the humor that I see in all of this, but maybe for a good reason, I don't know. But it sounds like you've been in seminary for the past like 10 years. All the stuff you don't learn in seminary,
correct.
you're learning it in real time.
Yes.
And this book is going to be like your dissertation. Like
No, that would be a good way. I've actually never thought of that. The School of Hard Knock Seminary is what you go into. Because, seminary, or they teach you a lot of wonderful things you need to know, but a lot of it you can't really learn until you start living it. Like last night, I just met with a couple who did premarital counseling in our house. We're doing their wedding. And I love premarital counseling, but I told them there's only so much I can teach you. There's only so much I can tell you about. You're going to absorb. At some point, you're going to get married, right? And you got to start living it out. And I want you to be in a community of people where you can start to interact when you have problems. Not like, let me give you a 16-step premarital counseling course and teach you everything you know about marriage.
Right. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, okay, you can take that course, but you got to live it out and start learning it for yourself. And that's a little bit what seminary is. Here's all the resources and tools and teaching and training. I got that from birth, man.
You did,
From my whole life, I've seen that. But at some point, you got to start walking out your faith. Yeah. Okay, you have faith. What about your works, James says, right? Yeah. So are those two things going to start matching up? And are you start living out what you believe and preach on a Sunday? You say you preach one thing from the pulpit. Are you living it at home? So, that's actually a really funny way of looking at it. But I
that's
think
your next book, right?
Accurate. Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Jordan Moody's personal seminary.
Yeah, exactly. Yikes.
And his 16 course.
16 session course.
No, it's crazy. So let me ask you this: because this has been wonderful, I think, and what I would love to know. Obviously, your book is coming out. Where are you going from here? I mean, you've experienced so much. I remember pulling out of Double Christian Academy because your wife, long story short, taught my girls preschool, I think it was.
Preschool, pre-K, she was a pre-K teacher.
So it was, she's wonderful. But I remember pulling out of the parking lot there, and you were there picking up Jamie, I think it was. Yeah. And we were talking window to window, and it was right around the time where you were really looking, for what the Lord had for you. Yeah. And you were trying to think through what's the next 5-10 years going to look like for the Moody family, and I just kept remember telling you, I'm praying for you, hang in there. God's going to open some doors, and obviously hope came, your way, which was super cool. So all this behind you, getting your book together, that's coming out. What next? Yeah, what next is I when I first came to Hope, when I was first called, I said to a few close people, I was like, I don't want to be a bad statistic. Okay, so I had read multiple times in seminary. They kept telling us, there's a lot of pastors retiring. The pastorate is getting older. And then there's less men being trained from seminary headed into pastoring. And the average tenure of a pastor at that time was around 2 years. It was short.
Yeah. So obviously some guys, like I know, faithful guys around here have been pastoring for longer than I've been alive in the same local small town regions, and I value their ministry. There's several guys like that in this area. And that's what I aspire to. That's what I want to do. Now, God also calls guys out of the pastorate. Just because you start as a pastor does not mean you have to spend your entire life in the same place. He calls you to different locations. He calls you in and out of things. Nothing wrong with that. Right. But for now, where I'm at, being faithful to my calling is I would love to be pastoring here in this region for the rest of my life. But I don't know what God is going to do with that. I don't even know if my people want to listen to me for that long. And frankly, that's a lot of the same stories. I am just not that interesting of a person. But seriously, I do desire a small town, local church ministry and long-term health and growth and those kinds of things. So I would love to be the same place. Our church is going through a unique phase too, in the sense we're going to be adding on to our church building here, Lord willing, this year, starting to dig and add on an expansion. And so I would hope in 5 years we would be able to have moved into that expansion, growing through that, but also being able to continue to reach this region for the gospel. We say all the time in our pastors' meetings, if your church was filled to the brim, if my church was filled to the brim, if Caleb and Dan's and all the other guys' churches were filled to the brim in this region, there would still be thousands of people in this tiny little region of Monadnock region that still don't have a local church to go to. They still don't know Jesus. And so I want the health and the best for this church of the Monadnock region that we've been called to, of New Hampshire, to continue to grow and expand and reach into these communities of people that wake up on a Sunday morning and don't think 1 second about a God in this world. And they need to know that Jesus loves them. And they need to have a place to then go and respond to that and worship and to be trained and discipled. And so I'm praying that our church would mature into that space to be able to continue to draw people in and to grow into that. And that I would still be able to be in a capacity to lead faithfully in that. And then, who knows, that with my wife, with my, family growing, maybe another book, I have no idea. Writing a book's like one of those things where you're like, I never want to do this again. And then as soon as it's coming out, you're like, I could maybe see myself doing that again. Kind of like my wife talks about that with having kids. You're like, I never want to have this kid again. And then you're like, well, maybe we could have another kid, kind of thing. So terrible. I think that's a little bit what it's like. But every time I bring up that illustration of writing a book and having a child, birthing a child, my wife doesn't appreciate it. So I don't know why. She doesn't seem to seeing that.
Maybe she'll co-write one.
Yeah, no, she's like, you don't know what it was like, and you're like, that's a good point.
Wow. So I got two more things. One is a statement. For those of you who are watching, my co-host Bill is behind the camera. He's messaging me. He claims to have found where your quote came from.
Really? That would be awesome.
He says it's attributed to Mother Teresa, most commonly
attributed. There you go.
Most commonly attributed to Mother Teresa, and that was the quote that says, "Whether I'm successful or not, it's more important to me be faithful and true."
Faithful and true.
Yeah, so I guess most commonly attributed to Mother. So thank you, Bill, for looking that up and doing some deep diving as we're talking. Last question. I don't want to keep you too long, and I remind me though before we close out here, I do want to drop a link for your church project into so when I send this out and people watch it, they can give to that. I think that's awesome. So remind me to do that. What would be Jordan Moody's advice for an aspiring leader? If you only had like one thing you could tell to an aspiring leader, what would that one nugget be?
Maybe two things.
I said one, man.
Yeah, but
all right, you can do an A and B.
I'm on a mic and I'm a pastor, and I might need to alliterate this too. Can we do that?
As long as you want, bro. As long as you want.
Yeah, you're like, hey, man, it's your problem.
No, it's all good.
Right? Character over charisma. And I always just think that through in my head, like the greater than, less than sign. Today in the church, I'll tell people, or I'm coaching at a soccer club in the area, and hey, what do you do? And I do this, and then I'm a pastor. And in New England, I don't know if people listen to this all around the world, whatever. Down south, maybe that's normal, but up here in New England, there's not a lot of churches. And the churches that are around or have been around, there's a lot of assumptions. And then even in our local region, there can be a lot of scandals. And so the word pastor doesn't maybe have the charisma that you thought, or the respect that you thought that you used to have as a reverend or a pastor. There was a sort of respect. A minister. Now there still is in some circles. There's still this thank you. Wow, that's awesome. You're serving and helping our people and this community, whether they believe in God or not. There's still this respect for a pastor. But I also understand nationally, there's a lot of public failures. There's a lot of abuse of the church and of people and of finances that is just horrendous. And so I think what's happened in our social media age, and here you guys are running a podcast, is there are so many mediums and so many ways to achieve a platform with charisma and skill and ability when you completely lack the character to back it up. And so I think what's more important for a leader is, take on certain aspects of leadership. Go for it. Take on that responsibility. It's what God's calling many people to step up. But at the same time, don't leave character behind, right? Don't leave the fact that God is working in you what he wants to work out of you. So he is working on the inside more important than what he is seeking to kind of bring out and the success that you're desiring to seek. So it's about character, not so much the charisma. Yet, can I also say, second time, get good at something, right? So yes, the charisma, the ability, the skill, be good at something. Like the church sometimes can just be like, well, he's a good character guy. Well, is he called? Is he skilled? Does he have ability either? So I don't want to just separate them.
Right.
Like I want to be good at something. I want to be excellent at it. I want to be the best I can be. And so for me, my main job is preach and teach. I want to be good at that. I don't want people coming into church and be like, oh boy, here we go. This guy's got no idea what he's talking about. But he's a nice guy. It's like, well, let's raise the bar and the expectation for what leaders should be doing, to take on the responsibility to hone your craft in whatever that is, so someone can say, wow, they are excellent at that. They are good at that. And they are a good person and they love Jesus and their character is more important than those things. So I just try to melt those two. But if you're going to focus on one, the character is really the longevity that's going to last.
I think you're spot on. I think, as you previously said, there's a lot of leadership positions that, without the character, they don't last.
Yeah.
There will be a tragic ending at some point or a burnout at some point. But to also be gifted, because I've seen, and as I'm sure you have, people that are given responsibility that don't have what it takes to actually accomplish what that responsibility requires. And that, I think, is the part too that was missing when that person took that responsibility. And sometimes that can be real hard. It's a disservice to a person that you gave a leadership role to. So no, I think that's really well said. I appreciate you saying that. So, but hey, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Yeah, this was awesome.
I so appreciate it.
For listening. Those of you bearing with me.
Well, my hope and prayer, Bill and I, we'd love to come full circle, and get you back in here to do a little Devo with me, or bring your book.
That'd be awesome.
Maybe we'll do a chapter of that together. It would just be so much fun. But
next year.
With that said, keep an eye out for Jordan Moody's book. I'm sure we can pump a link around for that too. But also, we're going to drop a link in. So if you want to give to Hope Fellowship, they're going to be expanding. Hope is a wonderful, wonderful ministry. Got a lot of personal friends, including Jordan, who attend that church, and some very close friends of mine go there. And so I'm a sucker for giving. And like we said, our churches partner all the time. So if you're a Jaffrey Bible Church member and you know that we're going to also be doing stuff that requires me to ask of you, I'm asking you to do this too. So
that's awesome.
Just partner with them. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So. And if you want to ask Jordan any questions, go ahead, drop them in. I'll email them over and say, hey, you got to come back. We had about 15 questions or so.
Right. Love it.
It's all good. God bless you as you listen, and God bless your week. And thank you again, sir, for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
God bless you all.